That's it? Oh, so you have half a plan.
Yeah, best.
If we can just start at the beginning, though, all the way back in 2010 with the first Skyline, what were sort of your original inspirations, the sort of background to getting involved in that?
Yeah, it's actually 2009. It would be like around Thanksgiving 2009. So it's like 11 years ago. The inspirations were really that the owner of Hydraulics and the co-director of the film had this penthouse apartment that he had been renovating. And so that building was brand new and he just moved in. And we kind of looked out there and we're like, oh, this would be a great set to shoot in. And if you think back then, like Paranormal Activity, I think had come out within a year, and Cloverfield. So it's very much like we could basically make a Paranormal Activity version of Cloverfield, but something within your apartment, because that was not doing a found footage, but it was famously like he just shot it at his house. And so we had been kind of like I'm trying to think other stuff at the time, but we had been shooting a lot of stuff like on our own. Like even I happened to live in like the bottom floor of that building with my roommate, and we had already like illegally shot like a pitch trailer up on the helipad in the middle of the night, where we're like in like paintball and acting like super soldiers, like coming across a rooftop. And like so I was like familiar with how cinematic the building was. And so that was all kind of the things that coalesced. But then you kind of look at the space and you're like, okay, what type of people would be in here? And like waking up hungover and like the world's ending, that was the jumping off point. And it was fun because like creatively, I felt like, my favorite part of the first movie is the creatures themselves, like the aliens and the progression that the aliens come out. I think I was very much like inspired by Lost at the time too. I think Lost, like its method of kind of that mystery box storytelling, was also something that drove that movie creatively, and even the flash forward opening. So it's a lot of that. It's a lot of stuff that's very much of that time, like
Such a good time for sci-fi TV those years.
Yeah, it was a lot of like, it was a lot of really cool, like like a bunch of like, even Lost is very much a throwback to older sort of serial type stuff, but it was within this new glossy packaging of what was possible. And so that was, to us, it was, it is like Night of the Living Dead meets Independence Day, but it had this really glossy, finish over it. But it was very much taking like a zombie movie type of setup and adding aliens to it.
And then, of course, you took over directing duties for Beyond Skyline. Was that always part of the plan that, were there going to be any more sequels that you would be the one directing?
No, it was, we talked about me directing after the first Skyline because I definitely sparked an interest to it. And I loved working with the actors on set in that one. And just, it was the best experience from going from kind of like a consultant / writer to then actually being the writer producer. You can kind of have a little bit more of a say, and it's not completely like, why is this guy talking to me? So I had a lot of interest, but I wasn't quite sure what. And there's always a lot of fear, for your first thing. And I think, in post on pretty much every one of these, people, financiers or studios are excited and they ask about a next chapter. So you start thinking about it once the movie's done. Usually have a couple months before it comes out, and you start trying to, come up with ideas. And we definitely, brainstormed on the basic ideas that ended up being Beyond Skyline back then. And it didn't end up coming together for a long time. And so by the time it felt like it was like 2013, I think Skyline ran on Sci-Fi or Spike TV, because we had one of the early Netflix deals where we went right to Netflix and skipping the pay window. And so we're on Netflix for like 3 years in those early days, which was great because a lot of people saw it that way. But then when it came back on TV, I watched it again and I was like, like I really love these aliens. I'd kill to do this sequel. And so I kind of went to them and said like, look, I'll just spec out like the treatment that we have. I'm just going to write it. but I'd love to direct it. And they said, okay, go ahead, do it. So I think it was just, it also because of the timing, and it seemed like it was kind of a now or never moment, you know, that they were like, yeah, go ahead, go for it. And then, yeah, it ended up, you know, taking about a year. And the guy who I'd written it for, Frank Grillo, went from being like, you know, this cool guy that film fans liked to all of a sudden being the star of The Purge Anarchy. It was just
Right.
like a huge hit. So I was like, damn it, it took me too long to write this movie. It's not going to work. But we just kind of caught him in this, because we were so like, obviously wanted him so badly, we made our schedule kind of fit his schedule. So the movie Beyond Skyline ended up like, it shot like earlier than we thought it was going to. And then we had to have a hiatus for him to do another movie. And then we came back and finished it. So it was like a 6-month production window that was kind of all around Frank's schedule, but worth it.
Still seems quite short, you know, compared to some bigger budget movies. Like a 6-month period seems quite like restrictive.
Yeah, it's, well, like the difference between our movies and like big budget movies is generally prep time. It's like the prep time where people will be like, well, I learned to do this action fighting because I trained for 3 months. Like the most we ever get is a month. And sometimes it's less than that. So it's such a benefit for me to hire actors that have, you know, really good athletic capabilities, which was a lesson I learned in Beyond Skyline. I mean, it was such a benefit that we had Frank, because he's such a, you know, intense boxer and trainer, that he could pick up that fight with Iko in about a week and kind of move on to everything else. And so with part 3, Lindsay, she's obviously been on a TV show, done a bunch of stunts and stuff like that, but she's very athletic, and she's kind of even more than the movie. So we had a bunch of things that she could pick up really quickly. And then Jonathan Howard was like a total bonus, because he's this great actor, but he'd been like doing Thai boxing for like 15 years, just as you know, way to exercise. So like his fights, like in a normal movie, we did a oneer with him, and it's like we worked on that for 2 days for rehearsal, and he's like, he's got it. So that's kind of and that goes with your stunt and action teams too. I mean, we had a Wise team and Beyond who are world class, and we had Real Deal Stunts and Skylines who are, again, amazing. So it's like, if you're gonna, you know, cut corners or have these shortcuts because of budget, you really have to like luck out on who you hire and get like ninjas that can really do it in a short period of time.
Right. And the first one was arguably not too well received by critics. So
No, it was not.
What did you? But after that, you know, all good.
Well, you know what's funny is I think if people saw it younger, so if you're younger now and you saw that movie at like 10, so say you're born in 2000, you saw that movie at 10, you probably like that movie more than the second movie. But older people who saw the first one first were like, no, and then they like the second one more. So it's an interesting thing, because like the first one's very serious, and the second one's like a little bit more tongue in cheek, and it's having more meta fun, I think, with the genre. And so if you're older and you're savvier and you've seen more things, you're kind of going to like the second approach more than the first approach. But, you know, it all works for me. But I'm just, it is interesting. Like when a movie exists and it's been around for a while, people seem to just like it more than when it first comes out. They're like arm's length. And that, I think the marketing of that one was selling it as something it wasn't, which, you know, kind of put a target on our back. But
yeah, it doesn't help.
No.
Is that part of why you decided to set Beyond Skyline in the same kind of time frame as the first one? Kind of like, I mean, that was redo.
It was sort of, it ended up working that way, and it ended up working that way as like a great way that if you hadn't seen the first one, you didn't need to, where we brought you up to speed. But it was very much like, I think, inspired by that like Lost storytelling vibes at the time, where they, you know, there's the season 2 episode where it's like you see Michelle Rodriguez's team go through the entire first season of the movie in one episode. So to me, that was like, oh, what a cool thing to like, we could do the whole movie of Skyline from this other point of view, and then we'll have everybody link up. And the first act in the script was much longer than what ended up being in the movie. And it actually like connected very literally at points of the first Skyline. Like in the first Skyline, there's one point where they look out the window and they see people like shooting machine guns on the street. That was supposed to be our group from part two,
Right.
but I
Nice.
couldn't afford to do the truck in LA at that point. So like actually when they come out of the sewer and the building's going, like they were supposed to get into a truck right there. And that was it was gonna be a whole other day and it was gonna line up, but it was like, yeah, we can't afford any trucks. It was like, okay, well they run. And I just kind of condensed the 3-day window of the first movie into one because it just wasn't going to fit like pacing wise to be 3 days there. So,
Right.
but that was the genesis, was like, I really wanted to do something that was like, you know, because the first movie was stuck from such a limited POV, it was like, okay, well, we kind of made this awesome, you know, invasion. Let's go and actually see it happen on the ground level and see it from a different point of view. Yeah.
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 And it's interesting you mention, you know, the funding and, you know, having to work around a restricted budget, because you then go and make a film that's entirely set in space, which is not the most like money savvy move, in my opinion.
Well, it actually ended up being cheaper and I think more efficient than the second movie in a lot of ways. And one of that is just the lessons that I learned in the second movie. But because the second movie has so many like locations and so many like stitches together from like one place to another, and we shot a lot on location. Whereas, you know, when you go to Cobalt, I made all the Cobalt on a stage and I could keep reshuffling different parts of the sets and keep reusing things over and over again in really efficient ways. And it just got better at shooting, I think, in general. But yeah, so it was like, there was a big set in the second movie that I wanted to build, and we couldn't end up making it work in Indonesia. So then when we did it in LA to build, it would have been way too expensive. So it ended up being green screen, which it just was a nightmare. It was like a slow moving nightmare that I didn't want to happen, and it still happened. So on part 3, there's only like 2 fully green screen sets, and one of them got cut from the final edit. So you saw the movie, right?
Yes.
So when she walks out onto that catwalk to blast the core drive, that's the only fully green screen set.
Really?
Like she comes up, everything else was 3 walls and had like at least some basic, like I call them like diorama sets, where you have 3 walls so you can film a lot of the coverage and it feels like it's a concrete real set. But then when you go to the other angle, it's green screen and you can push, you know, the scope and make it feel like it's a much bigger epic sci-fi backdrop. So that way I was just kind of like picking my spots a little bit so that I wasn't every single shot. I mean, that was the problem. I had like really nice character scenes in Beyond Skyline that the 2 actors would just be talking slowly, like Trent and Audrey, but like it's a VFX shot when they're just like talking to each other. And I was like, nah. So it ended up getting cut like before I could even make it work. You know what I mean? So I just didn't want to put myself in that same situation again. And that was the lesson. But yes, even thinking about the budget, it goes into the script. It kind of goes into the very conception of it and how you can do it this way. It's like, it's a little intuitive, and it's just kind of been like working, you know, with the visual effects company for like 15 years. I just kind of have a couple of those things ingrained in my head on how to
because that's where you started
it
out, right? Virtual.
Well,
like,
I always
VFX.
started. Yeah, I started with those guys doing their commercials and music video treatments. So it's always been from a writing standpoint, but it's been like trying to understand what they did and how to translate their visual strengths, you know, cinematically. So it was always kind of within this creative standpoint and understanding what would be really expensive and what would look really cool, but not blow out the budget and stuff like that. So, you know, like we avoid like water and fur, you know. There's like little things that, you know, you would think like, oh, it's you can go to an alien planet, you might as well make it an ocean planet. Like no water. so little tricks like that, you know, kind of help quite a bit. But yeah, it's definitely like a rush to somehow try to like be as ambitious as possible to me. I can't quite help myself.
Mm.
I could make my life a lot easier if I did like just, didn't
But
try
then
as
it's
hard.
not as much fun.
Yeah.
You can't do it.
I agree. I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know why I have to put myself like in the hardest situation possible. It's fun that way.
Absolutely. And when you initially came up with the idea for Skyline, had you always envisioned that it would be a sort of trilogy or even like a more than one movie?
No, it was, to me, the first movie was kind of like, when we first came up with it, very much the ending was just like, we don't win. Like if an aliens come and they're this hostile, like we have no proper defense and we'd be wiped out. And so that was kind of like, okay, that was it. And then once you shoot it, I even remember the night before the last scene, it got bigger, and then testing, it got bigger and bigger. And then people ask about a sequel. So then you start, brainstorming, but each one has been kind of like inspired by the last one. Like for part 3, I didn't really have an idea for a sequel when I was making Beyond. I felt like they just walked off into the sunset because the first one ended on such a cliffhanger. I just wanted to be like, it's over.
Yeah.
But then we tested it and people were like, well, what's next? You can't just end a sequel without a sequel tease. I was like, geez, okay. It's like Goldilocks, too hot, too cold. And they also wanted to know what happened to Rose, because if you imagine that movie without the Lindsay Morgan wraparounds, you're like, wait, does that little girl like die in a week? What's going on? So we came up with the wraparounds, and I was like, racking my brain on who to cast for her, that looked like the girl that we'd already shot, obviously, in Indonesia. And it popped into my head from Lindsay from the 100. And she just had like this she fits with Frank Grillo for some reason. Like they're both very like physical, authentic actors.
They have that
Even though,
same presence, definitely.
yeah, it's a presence.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not like and she's not supposed to be his biological daughter, but just like that she has his attitude. And so that seemed to just click. And we got her for one day on Beyond, and I had a blast. I was like, oh, she can do kind of everything. And by the time we finished the last shot where she's attacking the alien armada, I was like, oh, I think we have a movie. I think there's a movie here between her and Trent. I'd wanted to do this international team of badasses. I'd kind of had that idea, once we had been filming in Indonesia with Eco and Frank. I was like, this is an international team of badasses. Wouldn't it be cool if we did like a Men on a Mission movie to the alien planet? But I didn't know how to get there. So then once we filmed that day with Lindsay, I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, we're in the future.
I see it now.
We've got a team. I see it. Yeah. And so that whole kind of like the 5-page pitch for what this movie ended up becoming kind of came really quickly after we shot that day.
Yeah, fair enough. And to be honest, it sounds like it was quite a sort of short-term decision to cast Lindsay Morgan, but she is brilliant. She is such an action star.
Oh, I love it. I love hearing that. Yeah, no, it was kind of like, well, I mean, it was short term, but at the same time, because like, yeah, I'm finishing that movie. I have a problem and I need to solve it. Right. So you're like, how do I solve it? But it kind of went into like a little bit of my like philosophy on that second one, is that like, I was like, I'm only like casting and working with people I'm like really big fans of. Because I just feel like that I'm never going to go wrong if I'm just like, I legitimately am a huge fan of them and I don't have to talk myself into them, anybody. So that was kind of like, it fit within that. But then, yeah, to pay off and then even after doing 2 and try to get 3 off the ground, that like to get that, it's almost an original movie, so to get the financing and everybody to sign off on this kind of new cast, and Lindsay has never been a lead of anything at this size and done anything at this scope. It was just like, I'm really, really proud that we're able to make that happen, and that like our partners like Ariane and Delphine at Highland Film Group and Ingenious, like that they were like, sure, she could do this. Like it's really, really hard. I've been trying to get original science fiction movies off the ground, some with female leads, some with male leads, for 15 years. It's like next to impossible. They give you like a tiny list of actors, and if they won't do it, there's no funding. So the fact that we were able to kind of do what I feel is like a back to our original science fiction action movie as the sequel is really cool.
Yeah. And you've got a fantastic cast in this as well. Like, what was the process into getting such big names attached?
Well, I think it definitely helped that we were like a UK co-production, in that we're over in Lithuania filming, and it was the summer. It was just kind of like, we had obviously an American casting director. Lindsay was the first one on, and it's always to me kind of this fun like mix between like really great martial artists and really great actors, and how they meet in between. You know, it's obviously I think the second person we cast was well, obviously Yayan, but even Yayan wasn't originally in it. I kind of put him in at the end when I felt like the movie needed a little more Beyond Skyline kind of flavor.
Right.
But I think the second person cast was Daniel Bernhardt. I was a big fan of his from John Wick and the Matrix movies, and I just like, once I saw like thought of him for Owens, he's just so perfect for the character. It was like an obvious. And the hardest ones to cast were Leon and Radford. And Leon, it was like a couple of different people that we had that scheduling wasn't working out. And his Jonathan's agent is Daniel's agent. And so he would kept saying like, look at this guy, look at this guy. And when I finally did, I was like, hey, he's got like kind of a young Christian Bale energy. I really, really like him. And then we did a Zoom, and we've been like, you know, best friends since. I love this. He's just fantastic. And he can kind of do everything. He kind of fits my like the aesthetic a lot. And like I could tell him to go bigger on the comedy, and he'll like find spots to just kind of bring levity in. And he's not afraid to be self-deprecating, which is something that's, you know, kind of rare. And especially in a male lead who's kind of like supporting a female star, you need that. You know, he needs to kind of like be willing to like let her win a scene. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, I can't say good enough things about Jonathan Howard, but yeah, like our three like ringers, our three like pros of Alexander, James Cosmo, and of course Rona Mitra, that all kind of happened right towards the end. And I tribute my producer Matthew Chouse for making that work, because like even Dr. Mal, like there's so many versions where I could have seen her just as, you know, like a very simple doctor. But then once you have Rona Mitra, you're like, okay, we're gonna change the wardrobe.
We're gonna give you a gun.
We're gonna give you a gun. And I remember when she did the first camera test with the wardrobe, there was like way more zippers and like chrome on that leather getup, and I was like, we might be letting our fetishes show a little too much here. We're gonna take that down. So we did do some adjustments and stripped it down. But Rona was still very like, she was forceful. She knew, she was like, no, this looks good, and you're gonna like the way it looks in the movie. And she was 100% right. So yeah, but I was even just saying, you know, Alexander is such a lovely guy, and gave me a very, very sweet email this after he watched the movie. And I was like, man, it was such like a cheat code to have him and to have James Cosmo just like set up this movie, because it's a lot of exposition. You know, it's kind of like skipping a movie in a way. Like there obviously is a movie that exists between Beyond and Skyline. There's a lot of story there. But because we have Cosmo kind of giving you this VO, and then Alexander giving you the stakes of the mission, you're just on to the adventure by the end of the first reel. And that's, you know, really, really hard to pull off. So I thank those guys a ton for kind of making the whole thing work.
Yeah. And James Cosmo's narration, I mean, just sucks you right in, doesn't it? It's that voice.
It's the Skyline version of Lord of the Rings. So that was my, like, there's a lot of that in the movie, I find. So I was like, you know, you don't really give notes. You're just like, you ready to go? And he's like, yeah, okay, that was great.
Love that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but your career so far has dealt exclusively with sci-fi films, correct?
Yeah.
You've got this in Portals, which is sci-fi.
Portals is definitely sci-fi. It was a little bit more of a horror bent, and that was a pretty unique project in that, like, they had already shot 2 of the segments, and they kind of came to me and said, like, can you make this all work? for a very small amount of money. And so I was in a year of just saying yes to everything.
Mhm.
And yeah, let's do it. And then as I said yes, it was like Skylines was happening at the same time. But you never know, movies are so hard to get made. They could all fall apart. But so I ended up shooting Portals like in April, and then immediately went to Lithuania to shoot Skylines. It was like back to back. And we were editing Portals on the weekends,
Oh,
while we
wow.
were filming Skylines. So it was all kind of crammed together.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was a really fun experience. It was great to work with Neil Hopkins in our segment, and my wife and daughter got a little parts as well, which is fun.
That's lovely. No, but is that intentional then? The sort of sticking with sci-fi, is that a genre that you just really enjoy exploring, or is it just how it happened?
I think it's intentional for sure. I think it's the one that gets my juices flowing the
Mhm.
most. I think there's different like shades within the genres, and horror and action and thrillers and sci-fi that all interest me to varying degrees and different things to explore. But what I love about the Skyline movies is that I'm kind of able to do a different genre each time anyway. So that's what I'd say.
That's
Like each
true.
one kind of
Yeah.
is an original movie in a strange way. So I get to scratch, a lot of itches. I kind of take things from the projects that I'm developing and trying and learning from different collaborators. And I'm like, oh, like for instance, between Skyline and Beyond Skyline, we worked with Alec Gillis and Tom Woodruff from Amalgamated Dynamics, who are, one of the best creature practical effects companies in the world. And we're going to make a movie with them about a safari gone wrong on an alien planet. And so it was like spending a lot of time talking with him about practical effects was like, I knew I was going to make practical aliens for Beyond Skyline, because it's like I just had gotten too much into that world. One, it only made sense for the budget, of course, anyway. But it was like it's just the different inspirations and the different collaborators that you work with along the way. You kind of get influenced, and I just really happy that that's the way that ended up going, obviously. So yeah, I definitely, there's other projects, like we have stuff in the works, but there's always like a little bit of a creature or sci-fi element into like everything that I get really excited about.
It's the most fun. I mean, like, I feel like there's fewer rules with that genre. You can just do what you want, basically,
I think
within the budget.
people would say that about these movies. We do kind of just do what we want, which is the most fun part. And thankfully within the framework that we have right now, like it's mainly myself and the producer Matthew Chouse that made this movie. It was kind of like, we know within the lines that like what we can get away with, and we just, sometimes it's not even an email to anybody. It's like, okay, let's just fix that shot, and we just can do it. There's so little kind of politics on kind of finishing, and even the notes on this were so kind of easy and unobtrusive. It was just a very, very lovely process. I can't really say it any other way, but it didn't feel like anything was being kind of forced down my throat, which is great.
Yeah. And would you ever consider doing a fourth one, or do you already maybe have an idea of where it might next go?
Well, when you have an ending like we have of part 3, I think it's inevitable to get somewhat inspired. The ending that we actually shot 2 endings.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So there was a more kind of I don't know, I want to say bombastic, but much more of I think a less emotional ending. Because there was, without giving any two things spoilers, there's the fate of a character that was like in question. And there was one version of the script where they didn't come back, and there was one where they did. And it was very much, to me, felt like he had to come back. And the earlier version of it was a different kind of thing that it wasn't feeling right to me throughout the shoot. And there was a lot more conflict between Rose and her brother in an earlier draft. And I felt like she has so much conflict with everyone in the movie, like she's kind of like on a run. She's a loner. people blame her for the mistakes that she's made in the past. They put pressure on her for being this Messiah type character. So I just wanted one character who loved her, in that, like, that allowed us to love her, and to see that she could love him. It was just showing a different side of her. And so that was like, it was never feeling right to me in rehearsals and everything. And it was like one of those things I was doing on the fly that Lindsay's like, you know, she says now she loves it, but it was like, okay, what's changing now? Like that end scene right before the credits was like, you know, I made up this costume for him on the spot, and we kind of improvised a lot of that scene. And it's one of my favorite in the movies. Like, it definitely, like, it snaps. It's like only like 2 shots. It all connects because everybody kind of knew their characters at that point, and they bounced off each other in such a fun, organic way. That's even another one of those Jonathan Howards where he's like, no, you look great, man. Like, it's just like the nice, like the perfect level of humor for us, where it's like, it's not making fun of itself. It believes in itself, but it's having some levity.
Yeah, it's funny because I would never have thought that there was any other ending for it, because it makes so much sense.
Yeah, you can't kill Chewbacca. That was my argument.
Yes. And what were some of your inspirations for Lindsay's character? Because I got some very much like Sarah Connor vibes, but obviously you've got Ripley from Alien. You've got all this whole legacy of sci-fi heroines. What were some of your inspirations?
I think there's like it's almost like if you combine Sarah and John into one character, right? Because Sarah's like, they kind of make her like the mother of the Messiah, but Rose is the Messiah in a way. So she's definitely, I mean, I even took a picture of her. I took a picture of my phone when she first came out in the like in her second act look with the hair and the tank top and everything. I was like, it just feels like you just like came out of this like James Cameron like machine. Like, she looked like there was like a James Cameron computer and it opened up. It was like, here's a James Cameron character, you know? So I was super excited by like you're saying, how she just kind of fits in and she can kind of do all of those things so well. But from the writing of it, I think that was that those two. And then, you know, believe it or not, like Vin Diesel's Riddick, I think, is the other one, you know, not thinking so much on genre. I can
kind of see that.
Yeah. Like, sorry, not thinking so much on gender, but just hero. Is that like, you know, Chronicles of Riddick, he's kind of this like badass that, you know, it doesn't want to be part of the system, but they need him he's the only one that can kind of compete against this insurmountable alien force. So I'm a huge Pitch Black and Chronicles of Riddick and Riddick fan. So that to me was even kind of visually, you know, they have the black tank top and stuff. So that was all very intentional homage to kind of fuse together, you know, a Cameron aesthetic in the 80s and 90s and the David Toohey like early 2000s, and make this kind of a space adventure movie for now. That you know, one of the great things about Lindsay is that she does have this like younger fan base that it's like, you know, even Pitch Black, like that was 2001. It's almost 20 years old. You know, like to me, it's not that old. Like I saw it in the theater. Loved it. But you know, for as much as influential as Aliens is, because it's a masterpiece, there just hasn't been as many movies like it. Like its influence is more kind of on the writing and the characters and the drama. I think it's one of the most influential scripts ever written. But like, it was so good, people like stopped trying to do like space adventure movies like with Space Marines for some reason. I'm like, well, can't we like, you know, keep? I would like one at least every 5 years. Like I'm not saying, you know,
reasonable.
Like, I don't think that's too much to ask, but there's hasn't been enough in my opinion.
If tomorrow you got to decide to do any project whatsoever, what would you do next?
Any project whatsoever is well, there's two projects that I have. Is one is called Abomination, and it's written by Bragi Shute, who did Escape Room, and it's a World War II set Arctic adventure survival horror creature movie that I really would love to make. And the other one, it's kind of been my baby for like 3, maybe 4 years now. It's called The Last Savage. And that was something that I wrote for Eco after being in Indonesia and working on Beyond Skyline. And Derek Kolstad from John Wick fame, you know, made created that franchise, made those awesome films. He came on and rewrote the script with me a year or so ago. And it's just been one of those things where when you read it, it reads like it's, you know, like $100 million, but so did Skylines. And I'm just trying to convince people to give me financing to make that one next. Cause that's kind of like just an ultimate sci-fi martial arts mashup, like in sort of a Mad Max meets meets Speed Racer world. So it's a very, very like turbocharged sci-fi R-rated martial arts fight film that gets me the most excited. So I'd love to just keep making that type of stuff, you know.
And hopefully you will after you make the 4th Skyline.
Yeah, well, I have so much fun making these. I don't know why it stopped, you know, like as long as we can continue to keep getting better and better and working with such great actors, you know, I have such a blast making them.